Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today, Masechtas Menachot daf Chav Zayin. We are going to begin on Chav Zayin about Aleph by the top Mishnah. Hakaimates, when it comes to the act of doing the kamitza, of the flour offering, miyutum ma'akev es rubo, even the smallest amount will be ma'akev the majority. What does that mean? So Rashi explains, shimchiser kol shehu pasol. As we've said, it's necessary that you have the exact right amount. It cannot be missing even the smallest amount. And for that matter, isaroin miyuto ma'akev es ruboy. When it comes to the other measurements, namely the isaroin of, as Rashi says, hayayin shlishas ahin shel ayil or vias ahin lekeves v'chatzi ahin lepar. When it comes to all of these libations, these wine libations, it must be the exact prescribed amount. As we said before, these mincha offerings, they have different amounts of oil corresponding to the carbon. So when it comes to the ayil, it's a third of a hin. When it comes to a kevetz, it's revius a hin. And when it comes to the parts, chatzi a hin. V'chein Hashemen, says Rashi, bein the minchas nesachim, shehu, as on the side, the Girsa says, shehu kishir hayayin, which is the same measurement as the wine, hahin bein belug the minchas nedava. So basically, it doesn't make any difference. As we're going to see, the pasuk is going to be saying all these things are ma'akev. It has to have the exact prescribed amount, as the Torah says. Yisrael miyutim ma'akev rubo. Hayayin miyutim ma'akev rubo. As we said, all the different wine libations. Hashem and miyutim ma'akev rubo. The prescribed oil for each mincha has to be the right amount. Hasoyles Hashemen. When it comes to the flour and the oil, ma'akev zet zeh. In other words, even if you have the right amount of soylus, but you don't have enough oil, or you don't have oil together with the soylus, it's ma'akev. Hakaimis v'halbana ma'akev zet zeh. So too, when it comes to the kamitza and the lavaina, they are both necessary. Says the Gemara. So my time, what's the reason why we're so strict regarding all these dinim? So because the pasuk says malay kumsoy, so it says that it must be a full kaimitz, and it says that trei zimni. It says it twice. First of all, Rashi says and vayikra, and one by the minchas nedava, the kamatz misham malay kumsoy. V'chad minchas chayte v'kamatz hakayin mimenu molei kumsoy. Chad mitzvah chad akev. So even though they're in two separate locations, one's talking about a minchas chayte, one's talking about minchas nedava, so different types of minchas, but the fact is, a mincha is basically a mincha, unless it would be a little bit different, like the minchas chayte doesn't have oil, so then it would just say that difference. So why does it have to keep saying molei kumsoy? So we know that when it's repeated, we say it's telling us that it's emphasizing it, that it's ikuva, that it's mandatory, and if it's not done, then it is not going to be a valid bringing. So for the same matter, isaroin, when it comes to the isaro and exactly how much is supposed to be brought, miyutum akevis rubo, my time omerkra, misalta. It says that you have to have this exact amount of flour. Shimchaser kol shu psula. Hayan miyutim akevis rubo kacha. As we find numerous places, when it says the word kacha, like by the Nesachim, it says the word kacha yiyasa l'shor echad, and that's found in Parshas Shlachacha, as Rashi points out. Hashemen, which is interesting, doesn't tell us on the Torah or where it's found. Hashemen miyutim akevis rubo. How do we know also about oil? The minchas nesachim kacha. By minchas nesachim, the shemen is ma'akev, even the smallest amount, because it says kacha. Minchas nedava amakra umisham na. It says from its oil. Sheim chaser koshu is missing any of that amount psula. Hashemen v'asoyos makan zed zed. You need both. Misalta umisham na. Migirsa umisham na. So the fact that it says this together, and then it says Megirsu Mishamna. So Shnehim Shina Hakasal Akiv. The fact that it's repeated again demonstrates that it is La'akiv. Hakaimitz Mahalvanam Akim Zadzeh Al Kol Vainasa. It says with regard to the frankincense, yes, Kol Halavano Asher Al Hamincha. So the fact again it repeats it, therefore it's La'akiv. Says the next Mishnah. Shnei Siri Yom Kippur Makvin Zed Zeh. As we know, in Masechtas Yoma, it says we take the two he goats, the two seirim, and they have a lot of similar properties, and we do a garul to be able to determine which one's La Hashem, which one's La Azazel, so they're ma'akiv each other. And Rashi says that when it comes to all the maisim of Yom HaKippurim, it says chukah in Parshas Acharamos, and then it says v'hoisa zoysa l'chukas oilam, and therefore v'chukah is an ikuva. Shnei kisei atzeres, when it comes to the two sheep that are brought on Shavuos, also makvin zed zeh. Beis chalois ma'akvei zeh zu. When it comes to the two chalois, also on Shavuos, that's also ma'akev. You have the shtei lechem. Shnei sidachim makvin zed zeh, which is referring to, and this is referring to the lechem upon him. Rashi says over here, lechem upon him Mishi Hashem. Okay, so the Shnei Sidachim Ma'akvin Zed Zeh, Shnei Bezichin Ma'akvin Zed Zeh. So the placing of the Levina and also the two cups of frankincense is Ma'akiv. Hasidar B'Bezichin Ma'akvin Zed Zeh. Beis Minim Sheben Nazir. So let's see, does Rashi help us out over here? Nope. Shnei Sidorim. So it says Shnei Sidorim. Actually, Rashi says Beferish is referring to the lechem upon them. Okay. Fine. Beis minim sheba nazir. When it comes to the two species of the nazir, says Rashi, the chalois v'rakikin. So in Parshas Nazir, there are two different types of chalos that are brought. Those are ma'akev. Gimel sheba para. When it comes to and Rashi helps me with the words paraduma. When it comes to the paraduma, there's three things, namely the 8 eras. You have to present also the cedar wood, the ezoy, v'shnei talas, the hyssop, and the scarlet, v'letzipoyrim, the mitzayra, and we also add for the mitzayra the birds. So Sheba Nazir Gimel, again, Beis Minim Sheba Nazir, Gimel Sheba Par, Bedal Sheba Taida, and the 4 categories of breads that are brought for the carbon taida. There's actually 40, but there's 4 different kinds, 10 each. V'dalad shibul lulav, which of course is the lulav, esrog, hadas, and the arava. You can't shake just 3 of them. You won't be makan the mitzvah. It's an all or nothing deal. V'arba shibul mitzayra, which I already quoted, which is the 8 eres, ezo shnei talas, which is also for the paraduma, but we also have the birds from the mitzayra. All these things are ma'akvin zed zeh. Shiva hazois, shiva para. So there were 7 sprinklings by the paraduma. It says Rashi, v'hizel noichach pnei oil moyed. It was sprinkled facing the oil moyed. So ma'akva zud zu. You have to do all 7. And this is important because, as we saw in Zvachim, when it comes to the Zrikas Hadam of certain karbanos, you only need to do 1, even by the Chatas. It was a Machlokas Beis Shammai Hillel over there, whether or not 1 of the sprinklings is enough, even though, of course, that's not the prescribed amount, but you can still be Yotzes, not Ma'akib. But over here it is. Zayin Hazoya Shel Ben Habadim, Shel HaKapayres, Shel Mizbech Hazah, Makun Zed Zuatzu. So when it comes to on Yom Kippur, the Kohen Gadol does numerous blood applications in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, on the Proyeches, on the Mizbeach HaZahav. He mixes the Dam Hapar, the Dam HaSoyer, which we learned out from the drasha not too long ago, that Dam is not Mavatal Dam, right? Because otherwise there's so much more Dam Hapar than Dam HaSoyer. Okay, look in Rashi. Bein Yom Kippurim, bein Yom Kippurim, bein the par olam davar, bein the par koy Mashiach b'vayikra. So when it comes to sometimes there's blood applications not only on Yom Kippur, but also with regard to the par olam davar shel tzibor, in a situation where the tzibor errs based on an erroneous psak, which we saw in Hurius of the Beis Din. And the majority of the people make that mistake, so there's a chiv of par hom davar shel tzibor. The Gemara over there asks who's mechuyev to bring it. So 3 machlokas, and the par kohen Mashiach, which is also over there in a later parak in Horius about the kohen gadol, who also has to bring a par. So there's blood applications, and they're all ma'akev. Let's see the Gemara. Shnei siri Yom Kippur makman zed zeh. So chukah, because it says chukah, and therefore that's it. That's how it has to be done. Shnei kisei atzeres on Shavuos. The two sheep, you have to have both. Makman zed zeh voya. It's like this. So that's how it says it shall be, just like this. Shtei chalois, havi shnei sidarim. When it says the two chalois is havoya, which is referring to the apparently the shtei chalois. Rashi says over here of atzeres, right? The shtei chalois is by Shavuos, and which is talking about the shtei halechem, another way of saying it. So also it's ma'akev. Shtei, which is the breads were made out of wheat, as opposed to on Pesach was made out of barley. The oimer offering. Shnei sidarim chuka. When it comes to the sidarim, which Rashi says the lechem upon him, it's you have to have the exact amount. Zos chukas atayra. Shnei bazichin. When it comes to the frankincense, the scoops, the 2 cups of levina. Chuka, it also says chuka. Hasidrin v'habazichin chuka. Also, it says there chuka. Shnei minim sheben nazir. When it comes to the 2 types of breads of the nazir, the chalos and the rikikin, which is brought down Parshas Naso, is the chsiv kain. Kain yasa. This is exactly how you must do it. Gilmul shebapara. As we said, when it comes to the paraduma, in which it's necessary to have all 3, the 8 errors, Ezov, the Shnei Talas, Chuka. It also says the word Chuka there. Arba Shibatayda, you have to have all 40 loaves. The Iskish Nazir, the Chsiv, Al Zevach, Taida Shlomov. The Yomar Shlomov, Rabba Shlomi Nazir. So that's coming to tell you that also the shlomim of the nazir, that also is included. So we know that when it comes to that, that it is ma'akev, and we make this connection from there to the carbon toda. Va'arba shibim mitzaira. So the mitzaira also has the birds, in addition to the Eitz Erez, Ezum, and the Shnei Talas. So it's all ma'akad chsiv. Zois tiataris ha'mitzaira. Okay. So that's what again, another pasuk. Zois. This has to be, this is the way it should be. V'dal shebulav, l'kachtem l'kicha tam. So as Gemara in Sukkot says, in the 3rd parak, that it must be l'kicha tama, has to be complete, all 4. Amar Rav Chanan bar Rava, lo shanu el she'ein loi. The only time we say this is if you don't have all the 4 minim. Says Rashi, Dal minim shebelulav akvin. Let's say you do have ein ma'akvin. It's not ma'akvin. What does that mean? Says Rashi, afilu ogdon ke'echad. In other words, you have them, but they're not eged. The question is, do we hold tzurech eged, the machlokas, Rabbi Yehuda, and the chachamim over there in Masechta Sukkah? So apparently, according to this, as long as you have them, even though they're not tied together, like we have the minhag to put the hadassim and the ravos connected to the lulav. So meisvei, for the Gemara, dal minim shebulav, beis mehen oisin pedis. 2 of them produce fruits, namely, of course, the esrog tree and the tamarim, the date palm tree. Beis mehen ein oisin peris, and 2 do not, which of course is referring to the rava, which has no taste and no smell, but also the hadassim, which only has smell. Oisin peris, when it comes to the esrog and the lulav, Ha'isen Paris use a kukin, with she'ein oisin. So they're required, says Rashi, Koimer kuan yuk echad. They all need to be like one. She'ein oisin Paris, the things that do not produce fruits, namely the Rav and Hadas, use a kukin oisin Paris. So what does that mean? It means the esrog, because it already is zikuk, is already oisin Paris, it doesn't need to be tied up to them. However, the ones which do not produce fruits, so those do need to be attached to the ones which have fruits. So that's why it says, based also on the language of the pasuk, tells us clearly that it doesn't say v'kapois tamarim. It says pri hadar, and it says kapois eitzava. It says l'kachta miyam rishon It says you're supposed to take for yourself a Priyetz Hadar, and then it says Kapos Tamarim. It doesn't say Vikapois. So their estrog is not connected to the law, but then it says then it says regarding the Hadas and the Rava, the Arvi Nachal. So the Ein Adam Yaitza B'Yidei Chavasa, and here's the key line behind Achu Kun Begud Achas. Now that doesn't mean that the esrog again has to be, but the lulav and the lulav needs to be connected to the Hadas and the Rabbi. So again, it's an interesting vart that you need to be connected to something which is isoparis. If you're not isoparis, at least be attached to something that's isoparis. It's interesting, like homiletic thought as well. Not only that, v'chein Yisrael, so to a yid, b'hartzah, when it comes to, it says Rashi Kishin, mis'anin, let's say you're fasting, einenin ad shiu kulin be'agud achas. We all have to be one big happy family together. Sadikim, says Rashi, v'rishayim, dumya de'oisin v'ein oisin paris. So just like the arava is ein oisin paris, and the hadassim doesn't produce fruits, but nonetheless they still have to be together. So too when it comes to Yisrael b'hartzah, when it comes to our tshuva, we're not going to be answered until we're all together. So you could say, well, that makes sense why the people who are not isoparis are not going to be answered, but the people who are isoparis, so why do you need them, right? Fakir, you think that drags them down, but that's not true, because the person who's isoparis shouldn't just keep it to themselves; they have to share with others. Actually, kulin begud achas shenemer, as the pasuk says, "B'nei b'shamayim el Yosef yugod naso al eretz yisada." Anyway, we see that the only time we have the yisayid, that we're all connected and have a strong foundation, is only b'agudasai, when we're all attached, right, as we're one strong unit. So anyway, it's a kasha. L'chayr, we see clearly that you do not need eged. You do need eged. So as we said tonight, it's machlok. It's a sign. Rua ben eged ben she'enu agud kosher. Rabbi Yehuda Omer agud kosher she'enu agud pasul. So Rabbi Yehuda is on the shita that it is ma'akev. So my time, Rabbi Yehuda, Gamer kicha megudas ezoiv. When it comes to the agudas ezoiv, when we gather up the hesap, we say that all these things need to be attached. Malhon be'aguda, avkan be'aguda. So just like when it comes to the agudas ezoiv, you have to have the shnei talas, and you have to have the eitz eres. All of it has to be connected to one another. It has to be like wrapped together. It has to be brought together when it's dipped. So too, for the ceremony of the Parduma, as well as for the Mitzayra, so it has to be together. So too over here, the same thing. So he learns on Gzer Shava. Rabban lo gamer gicha kicha. They don't hold on this Gzer Shava. Therefore, you don't. It's eged is not ma'akev. Kaman also hadasani lula mitzvah agdoi. It's a mitzvah to do it. The mo agdu kasher. If you don't do it, no big deal. So come on. Ik Rabbi Yehuda lo agdu my kasher. What do you mean? It says it's ma'akev. You rabbanon my mitzvah. They say not to do it at all. No, le'ayim rabbanon. My mitzvah mishum zekil v'yanvehu. Exactly what if there's no gzeres hakasab, gzeres shava? What exactly is this notion of zekil v'yanvehu? It's more beautified to have it all together. I guess the idea just simply is that if it's all you have a lulav and you have a bunch of hadassim and aravos and they're all like scattered, so it doesn't look as nice. But if they're all organized and prepared and put nicely in like one nice package, so then that's considered to be a little bit nicer. So they don't learn kicha kicha. Very interesting taisus over here, because for those that were learning Kedushin recently, in the other Daf Yomi cycle, it says he doesn't learn kicha kicha. The Gami kicha kicha mistay Ephraim. We do learn out the Gzer Shava of how do we know Kedushi Kesef, Shemahach Dahacha Enu Mufna, right? Because there's a difference if Gzer Shava is Mufna. These are extra words or not extra words. Yinami kicha kicha gamri kicha kicha loy gamri. So it could be the difference between the words kicha and kicha likicha. Okay, which is again interesting because we know it says v'shava kayin uva kayin, so that could still be gzer shava. They're totally different words. Okay, ayin taisus. Again, it's an interesting notion. It doesn't mean that kicha kicha he never heard a Messiah from it. It's that it almost sounds like those two words are not shaykh for gzer shava, which again is hard to understand. So maybe sometimes it is and sometimes it's not. It's basically what Taisus is saying. Okay. Sheva Hazoy Shibapara. Let's just see if we have a question over here. Let's keep going. So Sheva Hazoy Shibapara. Or Ma'akvi Zu at Zu, because Chukah. Right? By the Paraduma, it has to be the right amount of sprinkle. Sheva Hazoy shall be in Habadim, which is on Yom Kippur, the Kohen Gadol does in the Kodesh Kodashim, by the Aron. V'shal Mizbeach HaZahav, V'shal HaPareches, which again, that also the Kohen Gadol does Zrikois, and it's Ma'akev, and Ma'akvu Zuatzu, but also, again, Rashi pointed out, that's not only talking about on Yom Kippur, but that it's also including Par Helm Davar Shal Tzimor and Par Kohen Mashiach. Also, they have to do certain Hazois. So the Yom Kippurim Ksiv Chukah, Par Kohen Mashiach, Uda Par Helm Davar Shal Tzimor. It's interesting, Rashi flips them, and Rashi does not point out Uda Seir Isiri Avodas Kachavim. When it comes to a person who is avodah zara, so the chiyuv is to bring a sayer, and also zrik, and also these sprinklings. Kedesanya, the asal lapar kasher asal lapar. You should do to the par just like you did to the other par. Matam l'lemer lichbol b'hazois. It's what is the purpose? As Rashi says, lishnois b'azharas hazois hadam. Why is it repeated? So we already know why it's repeated, as often we've already seen. As we continue to Chavzayin Bebeis, it's telling She'im Chisar Achas Min Hamatanis Los Klum. It's an all or nothing deal. You got to do the whole thing, or it is not acceptable. Okay. All right. So that's the end of that little piece, and let's just see if there is another question over here. Okay, let's keep on moving. There's no questions on that first Amud. So. Tanubanan, Sheva Hazois, when it comes to these 7 sprinklings, which we've already talked about, so Shibapara, by the Paraduma, Shi'asin Bein Shloshman. Let's say you did it without the proper intention. It was done Shlo Lishma, which again we talked about quite extensively in Menachot as well as here. Bein Shloi Michavanois. Or it was not directly facing the Pesach HaHeichel. Rashi says, Sholchivin keneged pischa shel heichel, psilois techsib b'chuka ve'el noichach. To read the parentheses, el noichach penei el moyed, psilois, fine. Because it has to be facing the Azara. And therefore, it wasn't done properly when it came to the Hazois, then, even though you did it, but you didn't do it properly. However, B'shibeth Nim, let's say the dam was sprinkled bifnim, says Rashi, the Yomi Kippurim, upar kohen Mashiach, upar helm davar usira v'eskachavim, right? The par duma was done by harizesim, right? But so that's why it doesn't include that. But it was done inside v'shibim mitzaira. If we're dealing with the din of mitzaira, which is supposed to be done by the shar niknor, by this very special gate where he's able to put his bahanois, he puts his thumbs in for the blood application, ksheris. So in that situation, it is kosher. What does that mean? Says Rashi, b'shar niknor, fine, is kosher. Ivosanya gabi para sholishman psulois. I thought when it came to the Paraduma, okay, fine. Sholishma, there's nothing to talk about. Obviously, it's possible. If let's say Shibethnim Chatas Ninhu, because it's considered like an Chatas. However, Shlomach Vanos Ksheros. I've learned elsewhere that when it comes to if it was done, it's kosher. It's not an issue. So Rav Chisel Kasha, Harbi Huda Rabbanan. So Machlokas, whether it's Shlo B'Chavanais, if it was the Zrika was done properly, but it wasn't done in the right place. In the Hazayas of the Paraduma, right? You did sprinkle it on the person, but you didn't do it in the right place. So in that case, it's actually Machlokas Rabbi Huda Rabbanan, the Sanya. Mechasuri Kapara, someone who's a Mechusur Kapara, which means they've already accomplished their 7 days. They went to the mikvah. They already had Erev Shemesh. Now the next morning, they're supposed to bring karbanos. Okay? And now that person has not completely achieved a purification because he has to wait until the karbanos are brought on the 8th day. But instead, shenichnasul azar. They entered into the azar, which again, they were not supposed to do. Now, it depends. B'shaygeg, if they went in b'shaygeg chayav chatas, like if you do something b'shaygeg, then you have a punishment of bringing a carbon chatas. Like that's only a chayav chatas is only on a b'shaygeg. The mezid and ishkaris. Why is that? So Rashi says, why is the punishment so severe? B'mezid the kol zman shlo hevi kaparasai lo yatzim idi tumasai. So the fact is, since you are still you haven't achieved kapara because you haven't had the karbanos brought on the 8th day, so you're still tamei, and therefore if you enter into the azara, we learn out from the psukim as Rashi says, ishi shashir yitma lo yischata, if a person was tamei and he wasn't purified, bedamim koloimer im oisin tameim who should srichim damim, they need still to complete the purification. V'lo haviyim, hasn't happened yet. V'nichnas l'mikdash, and then they enter the mikdash. The pasuk says v'nichrasa, so they are chayiv right away. They're chayiv karis. Okay, and that's the Gemara. The Rashi continues to go through that. Okay. Zvein sar chomer tful yoyim b'denafka hasam mavoid to masuboy b'shar kol hatameim shechayavin. So it's not talking about a Tvul Yom. A Tvul Yom is never Pasha. We're talking about even someone who's a Mechusek Kippurim who enters in there. He's also, if it's B'shai Geis Chayiv Chatos, but Mezid, he's going to be the severe punishment of being Chayiv Kares. Okay. So again, B'shai Geis Chayiv Chatos, Mezid Onish Kares Ve'en Tzarech Omer Tvul Yom. You don't even have to mention that, of course. V'shokol Otameim, that certainly they're going to be Chayiv Kares for entering there. Okay, and let's say you have someone who is tahar, and they enter lifnim mechitzasa. They went within from where they're supposed to go, which Rashi says there's Yud Alf Amma. There's 11 Amos. There's Makom Terisas Ragli Yisrael, which is where the Yisrael are allowed to go, but they can't go any deeper into the Beis HaMikdash. And let's say they did, they're totally tahar. That the Taharim Shenus Lifnim Mechitzasa, they went beyond their borders. Lahechel Kul Bar Kuloi Bar Boim. So the din is they get Malchus because the pasuk says Alav. It says Val Yovel B'chol Eis El Kaidish. Right? It says you're not allowed to enter whenever you want into the Kaidish. This is a lav, and therefore if you enter, even though you're Tahar, but you're as a Zar, you're going to be Chayiv Malchus. Mebeis La Paroiches El Pnei Kaparis B'misa. However, if you are even more brazen and you go mibes la paroiches, which lefnai lifnim, you go all the way into the kodesh hakadashim where the aron is, or the pnei hakapyrus, where the curtain is, which is also you went up in lifnei haaron, you went in front of it. So it says b'misa. So according to this shita, you get killed. There's a misa b'dei shemayim. Rabbi Huda Eimer, no, kol heichel kulo ume beis la paroiches bar boyim. When it comes to the heichel, including the beis la paroiches, you get malchus. You're not going to get misa for going to the beis la paroiches. Del pnei kapiris b'misa. Okay, I'm not going to argue with that. If you go mamish to the pnei kapiris, which is the kapiris is that which covered the top of the aron, which means you're in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Okay, I'm not going to argue with that. So that you're going to get Misa Mishamayim. The question is, what's the din? Not that you went into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, but you were Umibes Leparoiches. So again, if you were in that location, there's a machlokas, you get Malchus or Misa. So the question just is, what is their machlokas? Ba'ikra. Based on the pasuk, it doesn't matter. You're not allowed to enter whenever you want into the Kaidish. It's not some free park you can walk into. El Pnei HaKapyrus. You can't go into the Pnei HaKapyrus, the facing the Kapyrus, which is another way of saying facing the Aron. Asher al Aron. Of course, the Kapyrus was on the Aron. Well, Yomus, and you will not die. Which is mashma that if you do go in when you're not supposed to, there's a punishment of misa. So what is the drasha? Rabbanan Savri El HaKodesh Blo Yavai. If you go up into the Kodesh, then there's only Chiyah Malchus. However, in Beitzel Pareiches El Pnei HaKapyrus Blo Yomus. However, if you mamish go into the Kodesh Kodashim, then it's a Chiyah Misa. Rabbi Huda Savri no. El HaKodesh Beitzel Pareiches Blo Yavai, including the Beis Paroiches. However, of course, the El Pnei HaKapyrus Blo Yomus. So they definitely again agree when it comes to that extra level of entering into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. It's Misa B'Nishamayim, and the question is, when a person who enters not El Pnei Kaparis, but rather Mibeis La Paroiches. Okay, so that's the Machlokes. So why are we bringing this down? So we'll get to this in a second. The question is going to be, as we said, whether or not, if it's the Paraduma was done Shloi Keneged the Pesach HaHechel, whether it works. The Rabbanan. So my time to Rabbanan. Why do Rabbanan say this? So that there's a Chiyuv Misa over that there's rather according to Rabbi Yehuda that there's only Chiyuv Malkus and not Misa. So Lichtav Rachmana El HaKodesh Vel Pnei Kaparis V'lo boy mi beis la paroiches. Why does it say that? The anoyamin, I would know Heichel mechayim mi beis la paroiches, my boy. If you're chayiv misa for the Heichel, so mi beis la paroiches. So is there any question? Mi beis ha paroiches the kasam rachman alamli. So why does it mention the Kodesh Kedoshim? It's mashma shmamina b'misa. It's come to tell you that you're chayiv misa for going in there. Yehuda ikas rachman el kodesh will kasam mebeis paroiches havamina my kodesh mebeis paroiches el heichel lav. You would think going into the heichel is only a lav. Maybe lav namula. You wouldn't even get malchus. Rabbanan no huhulo matzas amish. You can't think that going into the heichel you're not even going to be over a lav. You don't get malchus. The heichel kul ikri kodesh. The heichel is called kodesh. Nemar behevdila hakapoyed hapareiches lachem bein kodesh bein kodesh kadoshim. So certainly no one would have a havamina, and you're not going to be chayav for going into the heichel. For Rabbi Yehuda, my tamis, don't say that. I would say that only there is misa. So of course the pnei kaparis inside facing the Aron HaKodesh in the Kodesh HaKadoshim is certainly going to be chayav. So el pnei kaparis the kasam rachman olam lishmamina. El pnei kaparis misa davka when you're in front of the Aron when you're not supposed to be in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. However, mibeis al paroiches bashara. There you only get malchus. Rabbanan hachinami the loy tzarich. You're right, it doesn't need to have it. But hay the kasam rachman el pnei kaparis. The reason why it says that is a muti derech mishupash. So if you go through a crooked path. Now, so let's say you put a hole, or you dug out, or you walk sideways in a crooked way. Says Rashi, Kagoin Mishubish Shechatar Hachayim, you dug a hole in the wall into the shel with Nile Nim. The also Pesach B'Daroim B'Basafa. And again, to get to the Kodesh Kedoshim, you're going toward the west. Let's say you made a hole on either the north or southern sides of the Kodesh Kedoshim, and you enter into that hole of Nichnas B'Pesach Shebemezrach. You don't go through the eastern gate, eastern, like through the Kodesh to get into the Kodesh Kedoshim in the conventional way. Sheipanav L'Marov Ninami Nichnas B'Pesach V'Tzidin B'Akasoy, and you're on a side. V'Hol Chastadim Lo Mechayev. Maybe in that case you wouldn't be chayev. The El Pnei B'inan Shehi Panim El Panim Mizrachi Shel Kapiris. You have to be like facing it. Okay. Kedetana back to the mark. Kedetana Rabbi Lezman Yaakov. El Pnei Kapiris Kedma Zeb Banyan Av. This is a Banyan Av. Kol Makam Shnemer Pnei. Whenever it says the word Pnei, Eno El Pnei Kadim. It's the eastern side. Rabbi Yehuda Lemekra Pnei. My El. So Mishamamina El Dafka. It means up to the Aron only. Rabbanan El Lav Dafka. Okay. Rabbi Yehuda Diarmer El Pnei HaKapiris Davka, and he says that says El, it's only because you're in front of the Kapyrus, that's when you're Chaim Misa, otherwise you don't get Malchus. Vihiza El Noichach Nami Davka. When it says Vihiza El Noichach, when it says that when it comes to doing the sprinkling of the Paradum, this is the whole point of why we're bringing this down. The question is Hati Mechuvanois. So he says yes. The mamish has to be Davka. It must be directly in front. When it comes to the sprinkling of the paraduma, right? And therefore, that is the point over here. Rabbanan midahasam lavdavka chanam lavdavka, right? So therefore, this is actually the answer to this question of shlo mechavanos kshera. So we said har bihuda har rabbanan. So that's going all the way like going all the way from the bottom to the top is what we're talking about. Okay, let's look at question 10. Tahar shenichnas b'mikdash. You entered into the base of mikdash. Lifnim michitzasai. Heichen anshu misa. So they're very careful how they frame this. So the Rabbanan said, "B'chol kaidish hakadashim." You're going to be chay misa when it comes to going into any part of the Kodesh Kadashim. Mebeisa pareches. Rabbi Yehuda says, "Mul pnei kaparis bilvad." It's only if you're right up to the Aron, not if you're only in the Kodesh Kadashim. You can be in the Kodesh Kadashim. You're going to be chayiv malchus, but you're not going to be chayiv misa unless you're mamish standing directly right in front of the Kodesh Kadashim, right in front of the Aron. So that's it. However, when it comes to derech pishpush, we say that's come to exclude that. Okay. All right. And again, so this answers the question when it comes to the paraduma, when it says shalom b'chavano, it says psul or shalom b'chavano kshera. So that is the machlokis Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanim. Okay. So maskav Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda. Now, according to Yehuda, that you say mid el dafka, that says el, so it's dafka only. Chaim your Chaim Misa is only when you're mamish right in front of the Kapyrus, and therefore when it comes to over here, El Noichach Nami Davka, that you mamish have to be directly in front of the facing the Pesach HaHechel. So Ella the Mikdash Sheni, the Lo Havi Aaron, the Kapyrus Hachanami Doi Ovid Hazois. So it sounds like when it came to the second Beis HaMikdash, we know that there were certain things missing in the second Beis HaMikdash. There's 5 things the Gemara says that were not there, and Rashi points this out. The Yeshayahu Gonzu, that when it came to the Ar and the Kapyrus, Yeshayahu hid them. So if that's the case, you shouldn't be able to do the Hazah at all, because it has to be mamish directly in front of the Aron. There's no Aron, so therefore there shouldn't be any Hazah at all, right? So on Yom Kippur, you shouldn't be able to do the Hazahs at all, right? The loy havi Aron v'kaparos hachanam the loy avid Hazais. So Marabba Baru Amikra v'chipur as a kaidish as mikdash a kaidish. Makom hamakudish l'kaidish. So says Rashi, Adam Aaron al makom Aaron mazeh, feel lake Aaron. So they used to sprinkle where it was, right? So in the first Beis HaMikdash, you walk in, your mom should see the Aaron, the Kapyrus. However, the second Beis HaMikdash, the Aaron was not there because it was Nignaz in the days of Yeshayahu. So there was no Aaron. There's 5 things that were missing in the Beis HaMikdash. And again, the Eish, the Mala, right? There were certain things that were not on the same level as the first Beis HaMikdash. Whole discussion exactly why, but that's the Metzias. Anyway, so he said no. It just as long as you do it in the Makoim, that's good enough. Rabba Omer Hava Hava Rabbanan. So now we're going to go back. We said, what is the din mechuvanos? Is it possible or is it not by the paraduma? So we said, well, Rabbi Yehuda says it's possible, right? And the Rabbanan say no. So we say no. The Rabbanan hold it's all like the Rabbanan. So I can understand why he says it's good, because he says Lav Dafka. So why do we say mechuvanos is possible? So our answer is Chav Chesed Aleph Ha Dikoi Mizrach Umarav. One is when you're at least sprinkling east and west. Va'adi, and you're sprinkling. Says Rashi, V'im Amad Koyin B'fanav L'marav V'acharav L'mizrach V'hiza Shekach Mitzvaso Afil Eina Mechuvanos Keneged Pesach Kasheros. So the idea is that you may not be a direct line of sight, but you're still doing it toward the Kodesh HaKadoshim, you're doing it toward the west, right? So you're doing it toward the Pesach HaHechel. Even though you're not mamish, it's not like due north, like, or in this case, like due west, exact, right? You're a little bit off, but you're still in the right direction. If he's doing it in the totally opposite direction or a different direction, so then definitely not good. It's interesting. It says Safain V'Daroim. It could have Again, Mizrach U'Marav doesn't mean that you're sprinkling in the east. It means you're in the east and you're going west, as opposed to in a totally different direction. Even the Rabbanan say that would not be acceptable. Omer Mar, V'shibif Nim, with regard to the being inside, as we said, let's read what it said over here on the previous Amud. So it said, regarding Shibifnim, okay, so when it comes to the regarding the carbon asham, so if you didn't have the right machshava, it was for a different carbon, whatever, so then it's possible. When it comes to the Mitzayra, even if it was not done in the exact proper place, again, it's supposed to be Bishar Niknor, so if it wasn't exactly in the exact right location, so it's still okay. So this actually is the opposite. So there's a question about Shalol Shema. Shalol Shema over here is mashma by Mitzar, it's okay. So Rav Yotzel Kasha, Rabbi Lezer, Rabbanan. So there's a machlokus with regarding Shalol Shema. Rabbi Lezer, Demakish Ashim L'chatos, as we saw at the very beginning of Sektas Zvachim, he compares Ashim to a chatos. So what is that? What is his hekish? So Rashi says, Diafil Ashim de Mitzar Pasal Shalol Shema. So it said in the very beginning of Masechtas Zvachim, also alluded to in the beginning of Menachot, it says that when it comes to a carbon, any carbonite, Shalol Shema, it's kosher. It's not oil l'shem chayva. So the l'shem baal, you have to bring another one, but it's still kosher. You can continue to do the avoda properly, even though you have to bring another one. Okay, but now when it comes to a chatas, also with regard to a carbon pesach, is also the other exception. It wasn't carbon pesach, not at the right time, but a chatas. Now, then we have the shita of Rabbi Eliezer that says also by an asham shalosh shema. So it's a machlokas by an asham shalosh shema whether it's possible like a chatas. So that's according to him. So of course when it comes to mitzvah, we're talking about a carbon asham. So that's the whole point. The makash asham lachatas, so makash nami lug lo asham, and he also makes a hekish lug to an asham. Let's see if Rashi helps me out over there. So beperik ezmim kaimen de ein lamidin lamed min alamed bekadshim. So the question is, can you learn out one thing to the next? Says Rashi. V'fil asham mitzvah pasal shalishma asham halamed behekesh mechatas then havi pasal shalishma chayz malamed behekesh al halug di havi psul shalishmai. Fine. So the question is, can you be loimed a hekesh to a lamed to another lamed? So normally we say yes. By Kachim we're more strict. That's the Gemara in Ezim and Kaiman. It goes through all the permutations. Can you learn a Kavachaimer from a Kavachaimer? Gzer Shava. Right? So it goes through all that. It's a little bit confusing, but that's what it discusses over in Daf Mem Tes. So anyway, so he holds you could make a hekesh to a hekesh, right? A makish nami lo galasham rabban lo makshi. The rabban say you can't do that. So Rashi says So let's go Rashi. Hekish dechatas al asham dechsiv kechatas kaasham tar achas alhem. Because yoylef Rabbi Lezer machatas sholish mapsula they feel rabbanan maida of asham nami pasul. So it's true that that one hekish you can say maybe also by an asham is pasul sholishma. Hikish the asham mitzara v'lu goy the lug shemen. So that is the question whether or not that sholishma is going to also be possible. How could he do that? Says Rashi. So, right, you can't make a hekesh to another hekesh, but when it comes to doing the sprinkling, it says on the side liyos oilos now l'shem chayva l'hater mitzara bekahal, to allow him to enter into the Kal. It says over here, that maybe he could eat kachim, psul shalishman, that we don't allow. That much we're not going to say that now he's not a mitzayra and he can start eating kachim. It just means that you could eat the leftover the shirayim of the lug and that's it. The shiri lug matzaira necholin, because that's actually something which is eaten, which is brought down later on in our Masechta on Daf Ayin Gimel. It says v'zeh yelocha mikodesh kadashim mimena eish shel karbanim ragus lug shemen shel matzaira. It comes to include the lug, the measurement of the oil of a matzaira, that it is consumed. So the distinction is whether it actually accomplishes the entirety of it, or we just allow you to eat consume the lug shemen. So let's look at question 11. Minchas malug shemen, the mitzaira shenasin shloshma. That was shloshma. So tanicha the kashma chad apostle. So it's true. There's a carbon asham. There's an asham mitzaira, but there's also accompanied by lug shemen. So certainly, as we said, the asham, you can look at hekesh from chatas to shloshma apostles, so to by asham. But the question is, can you make a hekesh to another hekesh that just like the asham is apostle shloshma, so to the lug. So, and therefore it cannot be even brought. So certainly we'll say that it is okay. Lalos l'shem chayva will have to be kashim apostle. We'll say that to mashir the carbon, for example, to eat the shiri halug is kosher. To say that it actually was l'shem chayva, in other words, you can't make that jump. You can only make it by an asham, but not by its lug, because you can't learn a hekesh to a hekesh. So therefore, even though maybe you could hold that the asham shloshma is possible, but not the shemen, right, was brought shloshma, because that's a hekesh into a hekesh. You can't connect it to a chatas. That's too far removed. By kachim, that far we don't go. So therefore, again, the distinction is like this: to machshir the carbon, at least to be able to eat the leftover of the oil, that we will allow. However, to say that to be able to matter this mitzvah, to be able to eat kachim, that much we are not going to do. Okay, we're going to stop there. Let's possibly look at some questions. We'll look at TA6. Zar sheniknas l'mikdash. So you have a non-kohen who entered in the mikdash. Be'ez makom loikar boy be'ez makom b'misa. Okay, so we basically saw this. So if you have this, basically the same question as question 10. This is TA6. So let's keep it simple. If the non-kohen, who is tahar, enters into the Kodesh HaKodashim and he mamish goes all the way up to the paroiches, right? He's el panei kapayris, everyone will hold its b'misa. Okay. Now, if all he does is enter into the heichal, everyone will say he gets malchus. The machlokus is mibeis la paroiches. In other words, he goes into the Kodesh HaKodashim, but he's not facing mamish the aron, right? He just like enters it, like he's on the side. So that's the machlokus. Rabbi Yehuda Rabbanan, is it dafka or lav dafka? Okay, so that is TA6, TB9. Hazois shel para she'enu mechuvanois im ksherois. So the sprinklings of the par, which is not facing mamish, is it good or not? This question is completely wrong. So there's really two pieces to this. So one answer, we said there's really two answers. This is TB9. Either you can say one is a machlokas, the Rabbanan and Rabbi Yehuda, right? Whether or not it's dafka or lav dafka. So we said over here, the Rabbanan mahasam lav dafka, hakanem lav dafka. And then we said that's one answer. Rava gives a second answer and says hava harabanan. There is a distinction, and one is if you mamish go, if it's at least facing the west, so then it's okay. But if you're facing the north and south, then it will not be good. Adkan.